Hello, my name's Wendy Garcars and I'm from the Micro Business Growth Club, and this presentation is about prioritisation, or the art of doing the thing that has the biggest impact first. Very often prioritisation is something that we really struggle with because there are lots and lots of demands on our time. Sometimes it's really difficult to tell which one you should do first or which one will have the biggest impact. So in this presentation, I want to give you some hints and tips about how you might tackle that and make your prioritisation more effective. So the key to distinguishing between what really needs to be done now and what can wait, for me, is the difference between what's urgent and what's important, and then picking the one that will help you to achieve your goal. It's difficult because time is a resource and it's finite. We haven't got all of the time in the world. We've got lots of demands on our time and we have to make choices about how we best spend it. It's valuable. We need to be making the right decisions. Prioritisation then is really about deciding what you're going to do and make sure that you do the right things in the right order. And there is a tool that can help us to do that, and it's the prioritisation grid, which was developed by Stephen Covey in his book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People in 1994. It's a tool that I use on a regular basis. It's very powerful once you learn how to do it, and there is an exercise that takes you through how to get your head around the rules for this grid, and I'm going to take you through that now. So essentially the grid is set out in 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1 is the stuff that is important and urgent. Quadrant 2 is the stuff that is important and not urgent. Quadrant 3 is the stuff that is not important but is urgent. And quadrant 4 are the things that are neither urgent or important. The exercise then is to use this as a way of compartmentalising your current workload. Now you can do this physically, i.e. you can look at what's on your desk and you can, on your computer at the moment, and you can sort it into these quadrants. And it's a really powerful exercise if you do that. It is a snapshot in time, but it will help to get the rules that this uses embedded into the way that you work. So quadrant 1, the important and urgent stuff, these are the sort of things that would go into this box. Any crisis that you have to deal with, any immediate problems that are pressing, any deadlines that you have to meet or meetings that you have to attend, emails, messages, those sort of things. Those regular demands on your time that present themselves and require immediate action. In quadrant 2 then, the stuff that should go into here are the things that are important to your business and to you, but not necessarily urgent. So these may not have a deadline, for example. So these are any planning activities, any relationship building that you may do through networking or through the social media contacts that you may have on things like LinkedIn. Any innovation or new product development that you want to get involved with. Any reading that you have to do to keep yourself up to date with what's happening in your market, any performance monitoring that you need to do to make sure that you're on the right track, checking out your goals and your progress with those, and any research and development. So you can see from that all of those are important to the business, to your business, but may not actually have a deadline as such. Quadrant 3 then, the sort of stuff that goes into quadrant 3 is the stuff that's important but not urgent. And for me, lots of these things are things that are delegated or inherited. So these are things that other people will have asked you to do. So interruptions, maybe phone calls that you end up answering, emails, meetings that you go to. Popular activities can also go into here. So things that you regularly like to do, that might be a network meeting that you like to go to, or whatever that you know is happening this week. and other people's requests. So these are things where you might get an email that says, oh, I wonder if you could can you just give me a minute? I'd like to pick your brains. Those sort of requests. And finally, quadrant 4, the sort of stuff that goes into here, Stephen Covey refers to these as mouse milkers. Have you ever tried to milk a mouse? It's a complete and utter waste of time, and that's what goes into here. He calls them time-wasting activities. So, that time when you think, oh, I'll just check that on the internet. You look at your watch and suddenly an hour's gone by. So internet browsing, social media catch-up can be a real thief of time. Some phone calls that just meander on for forever. And in lots of cases, people think that they should be eradicated from your daily work. I don't. I would disagree with that. I think as human beings, we naturally can only concentrate for limited amounts of time in short bursts. So I think that the most that the average person can concentrate for is 45 minutes, an hour tops. And then you need a break from that. You need to just stretch your legs, move away from your desk, maybe make a cup of tea or whatever, and come back to it again when your brain's had a chance to not concentrate intently for a few minutes. Those are time waster activities, those are escape activities, and I think we need to be building those in because your brain needs that rest. So slightly controversial way of using, but that's the way I use the grid and I find it works well for me to do that. So once you've done the exercise then, most people when they've done this for the very first time find that quadrant 1 and quadrant 3 are the fullest boxes and that there is very little in quadrant 2 and very little that they want to admit to in quadrant 4. So that's normally the way it pans out. Yours may be different. But for me, I think that that's because in the sort of fast-paced world that we live in, we have been lured into a world where we firefight for most of our day. So that's why a lot of our day is taken up with quadrant 1 activities, these things that require immediate attention, urgent action, when we find ourselves so wrapped up in that we don't get round to doing some of the important stuff. Now the danger of that is that you may come in with all the best intentions, you may create yourself a to-do list for that day. You end up getting drawn into quadrant 1 activities, and then before you know it, it's time to go home. And when you look at what you've achieved, you struggle to tick anything off on your to-do list because everything else has been that urgent thing that requires immediate action, and you've not actually tackled any of the big jobs that you needed to do. So it's why we struggle with prioritisation, but why this grid approach is so very valuable. Because it comes, once you've done the initial sorting activity, it comes with a set of rules for making the grid work. And these are the rules. Quadrant 1, this uses the Einstein technique. Quadrant 1, do it first, get it out of the way. Quadrant 2, protect time to make sure this gets done. Quadrant 3, we delegate, and quadrant 4, we ditch it. Although, as I say, I've put a caveat to that. So these rules to make this grid work are really simple. When you start to physically allocate your work using the grid approach, nothing should go into quadrant 1 that is predictable or that can be scheduled into a diary. So these are things that you can do to prevent it becoming a crisis, prevent it from being lumped in with all of the other firefighting that you do. So a classic one that I deal with all the time when I'm dealing with bookkeepers or accountants, they know that the year end is coming. They know that they're going to have loads and loads of people who leave it till the last minute to do their tax returns, and yet their quadrant 1 box is filled with that sort of stuff at the end of March. So it's really about starting to control how that workload is fed into you. And so if you are going to do that, then how do you get stuff out of quadrant 1 and into quadrant 2? Well, it's quite simple. You tell people that you will give them an allocated deadline, and if they fail to deliver against that deadline, then actually there is a consequence to that. They may actually be fined by HMRC for not getting the stuff to their accountant on time. And once they understand that there is a consequence to their own lack of planning in that way, then their behaviour starts to change too. So in quadrant 1, nothing should appear in that box that is predictable or can be scheduled by requests to other people. And when we're looking at it, if we're looking at the time allocation, no more than 20% of your working day should be spent in quadrant 1 activities. Because if you are spending more than 20% of the time, then it means you're being reactive rather than proactive. And reactive is not a good way for a business to run over a long period of time, because it stifles all sorts of creativity and growth activities. So we need to be controlling the stuff that goes into quadrant 1. Quadrant 2 then this is where you schedule time to make sure that you physically do the work, so that it doesn't become an urgent crisis because you haven't got round to doing it. And the sort of activities that go into here are the things that you can protect time to do, and that should be responsible for up to 60% of your daily work. So 60% of your daily work should be in that physical working on things so that they don't turn into crises. Quadrant 3 then, we should be delegating wherever possible. Ask yourself the following questions about the stuff that appears in quadrant 3 for you. Am I the best or the only person that can deal with this? And will my work benefit if I do this? And very often what you find is that this is where urgent work is appearing, or important work is appearing, and masquerading as that. And when you look at it, you're actually doing something off somebody else's to-do list and not your own. So the way to handle this stuff is you point it back towards them. And that might be because you don't have time, you don't have capacity, or actually you don't have the knowledge to be able to do this, and they would be better completing this rather than you. And that takes a bit of assertiveness, but it is important that you don't inherit work that isn't really yours. And people will take advantage, particularly if you are working in consultancy and you're supporting a business. It's amazing the sort of things that suddenly become your job that may not have been part of the original agreement when you started working with that client. So do start to push back. Otherwise, you end up taking accountability for things that really are not your responsibility. Again, another measure is that no more than 15% of your working day should appear in quadrant 3. Quadrant 4 then, these escape activities. My view is that these activities shouldn't be completely eradicated because they serve a purpose. They give your brain that necessary break to be able to go off and make a cup of tea or maybe do a bit of internet browsing, but it has to be controlled and limited, and that has to be to 30 minutes a day. And so what you can do is split that up into 5-minute chunks if that's helpful, so that you're regularly getting up and walking away from your desk and stretching your legs and stuff, but that you're not spending or losing hours doing stuff that really isn't contributing to your day job. The aim for this then is that less than 5% of your working day should be spent on quadrant 4 activities. Now, by applying these rules, you really start to get a sense of what's important and what's urgent, and what are other people's created crises, and that enables you to make much better decisions about prioritisation based on what is going to be good for you and your business, rather than what is going to appease other people. By working the grid, the tasks cease to be urgent because they're scheduled in, and therefore are less likely to turn into crises. As I say, delegating is really about not being driven by other people's agendas and priorities, starting to push that back and making them own some of their own stuff. It's also about being honest about your time wasting activities, particularly if you're prone to a bit of procrastination. And using this grid helps you to differentiate between all of those things. You can create a whole set of new habits around time management, decision making, prioritisation, and ultimately improve your personal productivity. Because generally, important tasks have more positive impact on your business than urgent ones will. If you want to read a little bit more about this and about the concept of prioritisation and about how it works for business, then I recommend a fantastic book to you called Will It Make the Boat Go Faster? It's by Ben Hunt Davis and Harriet Beveridge. It was published in 2020, and it is the story of how a mediocre rowing team went to the Sydney Olympics in 2000 with very low public expectation about coming away with anything, and they came back with a clutch of gold medals. And this is the story about how their performance was impacted so magnificently simply on a prioritisation tool. And it talks about lots of the concepts we've just mentioned in the presentation, but ultimately it came down to a single question. When they were training for the Olympics, they asked the question, when they looked at a new training technique or a new habit they were trying to develop, will this make the boat go faster? And if the answer was yes, then they did it. And if the answer was no, then they didn't do it. And history proved that approach incredibly effective for them. And I would commend it to you for your recommendation. We spend too much time in our day-to-day lives doing things that other people kid us are important. But who are they important to? So if you've never tried it, have a go at doing this exercise. It can be incredibly empowering, but it can also be a fantastic boost to your productivity. Good luck with it. Thank you.